Nothing says sharing the love quite like homemade pasta sauce. It's not that hard to make, and when you do it right, people really do appreciate it. I know I appreciate my own sauce, and so do other people. Now, the sauce I'm going to make today could be used for either pizza or pasta, depending on some slight variations. Let's fix it. So I'd like to go over a couple of details regarding ingredients. So let's talk about tomatoes. I usually use crushed canned tomatoes, and I look for a brand that is relatively low in salt. The reason why is because I just don't want my sauce to be super salty, that's all. I like to control how much salt I'm adding. And this brand in particular has really low sodium content. Also, you're going to want to get yourself a good tomato paste. I like getting the tube because I usually don't use a whole little can of tomato paste all at once, so there's always some that goes to waste. With this tube situation, I can control how much and put it in the fridge and not worry about going bad as long as I use it within a reasonable time frame. So I also like to add some alcohol to the sauce. It really brings out the flavor of the tomatoes. And the way I'm using the sauce will affect which type of alcohol I'm using. If I'm using the sauce for pasta, I'll go with vodka, because vodka really brings out the tomato flavor, makes it nice and sharp, and the tomatoes are really the hero. In a pizza sauce, I like it to be a little more toned down just a little bit, and I think a nice red wine will do that.
Don't ever cook with a wine that you won't drink.
Sage wisdom from the late great Cajun chef. A couple other things to keep in mind. If the tomato flavor is a little flat, I like to add a little sugar and white vinegar. It just brightens up that tomato flavor. Sometimes canned tomatoes can be that way. In fact, fresh tomatoes are sometimes that way too. And finally, if I'm making pizza sauce, I like to add just a little bit of cinnamon. You might think cinnamon on pizza sauce, just add a little bit. It's a nice, surprising little bonus in the sauce that people will appreciate and may even wonder what that special zing is that they can't quite detect. So the first step, of course, is chopping an onion. I tried to find an organic yellow onion, but I couldn't find any this time, so I tried to find the smallest regular yellow onion I could, and we'll just use that. This thing is such a monster. Yeah, it's no joke that all the yellow onions are huge these days. So I do my tried and true method of cutting the onion vertically first, remove the layers of the outside, and then chop one way, rotate, chop the other way. Seems to work pretty well. I like how the stump or the bottom of the onion holds everything together. And look at that, you get one whole bowl full of onion just from the one onion. It's crazy. Then I'm going to do 4 cloves of garlic. So not only is it fun to smash the garlic with a knife, it makes it a lot easier to peel. So after I peel the garlic, I just cut the ends off, and then what I'll do is I'll line it up one way and then cut it all in that direction and then rotate my cutting board the other way, chop it, and then choppity chop a little more. All right, that's the perfect size for pasta sauce. Now we just need to open the wine and everything else will be done over at the stove. Ah, smells nice. Now let's start sauteing. So I'll start off by drizzling 2 tablespoons of olive oil in my preheated pan. Then we'll just give it a quick swirl around, make sure everything's covered, and then we'll add the onion. I didn't just dump in the onion because I wasn't really convinced I was going to use it all. So I put some in, looked at the pan, put in a little more, and give it a little stir, a little bit more, stir it a little bit more. Now I'm thinking about it, and I'm really thinking about Polly from Goodfellas.
Don't put too many onions in the sauce.
Sorry, Polly. I'm gonna risk it. Hopefully it'll turn out. You definitely want to season the onions, so I'm gonna add some salt here, and then after that some ground pepper. So I realize what I'm doing doesn't provide the best camera angle, so look at that, I'm going to switch to lefty. Oh, look how classy that is, just like a fancy restaurant or something. So go ahead and stir in the seasoning, and then we'll just let time and heat do its thing. When you're sauteing, you want to make sure that you're mindful about how much you're stirring. You don't want to stand over the pot and stir it constantly because it'll never brown that way. You need it to actually sit for a while so the parts that are touching the pan will have time to brown, and then you stir it and then you give the other parts a chance to brown. If you just keep stirring all the time, it won't brown at all. It'll just slowly cook. You do want to watch if the pan's starting to dry out though, because then things will start to burn or scorch. I noticed that the oil's getting a little low, so I go ahead and add a little bit more, continuing with the sauteing. But that onion looks pretty good the way it is. It's about time to add some garlic. So once the onions start to turn clear and brown, you want to add the garlic. And just saute that for a minute or two. You don't want to get it till it burns or anything. You just want it to cook a little. When garlic is finely chopped, it doesn't take more than a minute or two to start toasting and burning. You don't want that flavor, so just be quick. And then add the tomatoes right away after that. Go ahead and add the tomatoes. So I've never used this brand of tomatoes, and I think in the past I've used diced tomatoes instead of crushed tomatoes, but this is super thick already. So that makes me think a couple things. Well, first of all, I may not need tomato paste after all. And second of all, I may not need to use a blender. Normally when I make pizza sauce, I like to put it in a blender to make sure it's very easy to spread around and not too lumpy. Well, with tomatoes like this, I don't think I'm going to need to use a blender, and I can just simplify by skipping that step. Yeah, waste not, want not. I definitely want to make sure I get every bit of tomatoey goodness out of these cans. I mean, let's face it, groceries are expensive these days. You want to get every little bit you can. Those beeps are me just turning down the stove from a saute to a slow cook. If you don't turn the heat down some, the sauce will stick. That means you'll have to stir non-stop and be in front of the stove all day, just like Michael.
Henry says don't let the sauce stick.
I'm starting.
We go ahead and add my seasoning now. We'll start with Italian seasoning. Just about a tablespoon or so. Then we'll add our oregano. Again, about a tablespoon. We're going to add about a teaspoon of salt. Grind some more pepper in there. And we're going to add a couple bay leaves. like all I have is bay leaf bits.
I may have overdone it a little bit there. It's really hard to figure out how many bits make up a whole bay leaf, but as I'm looking at that, I may have put more like 3 in there instead of 2. Well, regardless, let's just stir it all in. I'm sure it'll work out fine.
I'm going to add a couple taps of cinnamon. This is going to be pizza sauce. Ooh.
Yeah, that's a little too much cinnamon there, but
I think that'll be okay. And we're going to add some wine.
I'm starting off with around a quarter cup of wine and just see how that is. Can always add more to taste later if needed.
And we'll just let that come up to simmer for a while, and we'll taste it and see what we need to add.
So it came up to a simmer and I gave a taste, and the whole thing tasted kind of flat. So I decided to add a little more wine. Also some more salt. And also I decided to add some sugar and vinegar to kind of brighten and sweeten the tomato flavor a little bit. I'm starting with about 1.5 tablespoons of sugar. And I'm adding 2 teaspoons of white vinegar. So 1.5 tablespoons is about 4.5 teaspoons. So I'm doing about a 2-to-1 ratio. That's how I like to do with my red sauce, is I like to do 2 sugar to 1 vinegar. So we'll gradually stir all that in and then let it sit for a few minutes, give it another taste, and see what needs to be done from there.
Still needs a little more wine. And a little more salt. Okay, that seems a lot better. Just going to let that simmer for about 10 minutes or so and check in again. So I'm done with the sauce, and remember I made this one for pizza, so I included some cinnamon and I also used red wine. If I was going to go for just a regular pasta sauce, I would not put cinnamon and I would use vodka instead of wine. So I tinkered around with it a little bit more, and I basically added a little more vinegar, a little more sugar, a little more salt, and a little more wine. So you might be thinking, well, how do I know what to add when I'm tasting a sauce? Well, the first thing I could say is if you taste nothing, it just tastes flat, and you definitely don't get any salt at all, you might need to add a little more salt. so you might start there. But you also need to think of how much salt is in the tomatoes you bought. Mine had almost no salt. If you bought tomatoes with a lot of salt, definitely don't add more than a teaspoon to your recipe. So the next thing is the wine. If your tomatoes are there, but they're not really having an exciting flavor, you might need to add a little more wine to it, or vodka if you were making that type of sauce. Then what about sugar and vinegar? Well, sugar and vinegar help to brighten or sweeten the flavor of the tomatoes. The vinegar adds more acid, the sugar adds more sweet, of course. So you need to taste your tomatoes and say, okay, are they sweet enough? Are they too sweet? Do they have enough acidic flavor? You just need to balance those tones. Okay, so all of that really comes with experience. So let's give this a final taste and see how it is. Oh, that's really nice. I'm really getting the tomatoes. They have a bright flavor, not too much though. Subtle acidity, subtle sweetness. I'm getting the salt, but it's not tasting salty, so I know the balance is just right there. This is going to be great for pizza. Let me try again. This is good. So I hope you try making tomato sauce at home for pasta or pizza. It's super delicious. Anyone you share it with will appreciate the love that you're showing. Thanks for watching.